Susan West, and I'm talking with Willard Gray in the village of Avon, North Carolina. You were born in 1911.
June the 17th, 1911.
Were you born here in Avon?
Here in Avon, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you tell me about your parents? What were their names?
My father was Willard James Gray.
Okay.
And my mother was Eunice May Gray. She was originally a Hipper before she married.
Okay. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had 3 brothers.
No sisters?
No sisters, and 1 half brother.
Okay.
After my father went off in the Coast Guard, and you might know him, Jack Gray. You know Anna Scarber.
Yes.
Gray, that was her husband. He was my half brother.
Okay.
He died about a couple of years ago.
Okay. What did your dad do?
He used to work to a powder plant in World War I. I guess it was, his first job. Before I was even born, right after I was born. But later he was in the Coast Guard. And then before he went in the Coast Guard, he went in the Coast Guard and served a hitch, and then he got out in the Coast Guard and got on the police force in Long Branch, New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
And when he left that, he went back in the Coast Guard.
Okay.
And he got out in the Coast Guard and he come down here and he worked to the Ford plant.
In Norfolk?
In Norfolk, in World War II. Why they turned the Ford plant, the Army took it over, the Navy,
Okay.
And he was still worked there.
Okay.
And that's where he retired from.
Okay.
And he died on January the 7th, 1969. He I don't know, he must have been 75-year-old.
Oh, okay.
And my mother, she died on January the 8th, 1967. And she 4 days of being 75-year-old.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so you lived all around?
We lived down, where Cyril Gray lives?
Yes.
We lived right where his trailer is, where our home was. And it caught a fire and the home burned down. Yeah, we was in there.
Were you living there then?
Living there. I had broken my leg on a Thursday. I was 12 years old. I'd broken my leg on a Thursday. And on a Saturday, they took me to Elizabeth City. There wasn't any ferries or anything like that. They had no cars. They took me to Elizabeth City on a boat. And on Sunday morning, they put my leg in a cast. When I broke it, the doctor down here had put it in splints.
How did you break it?
I was playing ball, and me and another boy collided, And they put it in splints, a doctor, a pharmacist, made from the Naval Radio Station. So they took me to Elizabeth City to the hospital, and they put a cast on it. That was on a Sunday. We come home Monday, on Tuesday morning, before day, the house caught a fire and burned down. With all of us in there.
My goodness.
And I had my youngest brother was 1 year old, and he got his hair singed, My uncle got in the window and got him. I had that cast on my leg, and I couldn't jump out the window, get my leg out the window. So I had to jump out head first. It was on the ground floor. We had been sleeping upstairs, and we had moved downstairs the day before because I couldn't get upstairs with that cast
with the cast on.
So,
and there wasn't any fire department in those
fire
days?
Department.
No water?
All we had was what we were sleeping in. There wasn't no social service, no welfare, or nothing. I mean,
Well, what
I was
did you...
during the height of the Depression,
Well, what did you do?
Well, we had a grandfather. I had a grandfather, my maternal grandfather. He was a retired Coast Guard officer, and he looked out for my father. Well, he was off working, but him and my mother was separated. He didn't send any money on it, so we had it rough. I mean,
So that grandfather,
took care of us.
Because there wasn't any work here for your mom.
During the Depression.
Yeah.
And I went in the Coast Guard in July the 14th, 1930.
Okay. Was there a school here in Avon?
They had a school, but the school was right here where this house is. That's where I went to school last night. My wife
Oh, really?
We had a class together. We didn't graduate because it wasn't accredited high school.
Okay.
So then they built the high school to Buxton and consolidated the schools, you know.
Okay. But before then, each village had.
Each village, they had a school. Each village had a school.
Uh-huh. And
except Rhodampy, I think they had, the three villages had one school.
One school.
But they had one
yeah.
year, one to Buxton, one to Frisco, one to Hatteras.
Okay. How far in school did you go?
I went to the 8th grade. I didn't finish the 8th grade. I went just a few weeks to it, and then I quit. I had to quit and go to work. I mean, you know, when I was 15 years old, I got out of school.
Well, the school, was it separated into grades, or
Yeah, it was,
were there a lot,
from,
pretty many kids?
From 1 up to 8. That's how
Okay.
long. And it was right here where this house is. This the old schoolhouse that used to be here, and the old store up there, the other ridge used to be part of the school building.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was 4. They had one large building. It was 4 rooms, and they had blackboards up in between each room. And then they would take the if they'd have a commencement or, you know, some kind of a gathering, or entertainment of any kind, they'd take those huge blackboards down. They could take them down and just set them on for against the wall.
Oh.
And the people in the far end could look at the people on the stage in the far building like that. And then they built another room on it for like it was just one building north and south. They built the one on the end of it to go east and west.
Okay.
And my last school I went to was I went to pay school part of the year. Just it was during summertime, you know, just to make up grades like that.
Uh-huh.
Like if you failed a grade, you go to summer school.
Right.
To get up.
Do you have any idea how many kids went to that school when you were going there?
Well, there was, I imagine there's probably close to 100 kids altogether. There was 4 rooms of them. I mean, you know, there was 8 classes, and you know, and there's a lot of younger ones. You know, there was only about probably 8 or 10 in the 8th grade, say, and like that.
That's a lot. When you stopped going to school and you went to work, what kind of work did you do?
Well, the first work I did was on that hill with my uncle. Had the contract on part of that hill, right Memorial there.
Okay. What was your uncle's name?
Chancey Meekins. He married my aunt. I mean, you know, they lived up here to the north end. And they didn't live up there then, but they lived down here. Do you know this house next to the Methodist church that they've just raised up? Have you seen it?
Yes.
Well, that was there. They built that new there, and that's where they took me when I broke my leg. And with the doctor, he put a cloth on my face, spread some ether on there, took me to sleep to put that cast on my leg.
Oh.
That was my aunt's new home there at that time.
Okay.
But it wasn't like it is now. The house, the storm washed it off of the foundation, the 44 hurricane.
Okay.
And when they moved it back, they turned it around. The front of it used to be facing, the front of it used to be facing the cemetery, you know where that is.
Okay.
But now the front of it is facing the other way, like you know, like the church side.
And so he was your uncle,
He was my uncle,
and
yeah.
he had the
He had
contract.
a contract on a third of that hill. There wasn't any Park Service then. The man in charge of that project, he was I can remember things way back then, but he was a retired Army colonel. His name was Brown, because I used to go with my uncle up to where he was boarding, renting or whatever, in Kitty Hawk Woods, when he would get paid or to see about the business, what about the work. And he was a retired lieutenant colonel. His name was Brown, and he was renting, staying in the Methodist parsonage in Kitty Hawk.
Okay.
That was in 1928, I'd say.
And he headed up
He was in
the
charge.
whole
He was the Army,
Wright
retired
Brothers
Army man.
Memorial.
Yeah, there wasn't any.
It wasn't
no
Park Service.
Park Service at that time.
Okay.
That was later on the Park Service. Because I had, when the Park Service came down here, I had 2 brothers in CC camp down there. One of them in the CC camp in Tennessee, and one who was in the CC camp here in Buxton, and he was in Madio camp too for a while.
And what did they do?
Well, they built these sand fences and planted grass, and they worked around where the old lighthouse used to be down there, where the old rocks was the lighthouse, you know, the old one.
Uh-huh.
And my brother, he was telling me about seeing these large cottonmouth snakes around them rocks and stuff when they was working in there. They used to have them CC camps. Here they had, I imagine there was probably 75 or 100 people in them. They was working around, and then they had what they call a transit camps. That was a different, they was, I lived on barges up in Rodanthe. And I worked on that WPA, they called it, Work Progress Administration. And I was driving a truck, helped with working with a truck driver, and I'd do a lot of the driving. We would haul these green myrtle bushes from Rodanthe down to the beach here, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd haul to build these sand fences where they built the dikes up, you know. Well, that's why I say I could stand in that door and see cars go up and down the wash of the beach. There wasn't any dikes or anything there. And then see, when the sea
And no big dunes.
no dunes at all. When the sea tide and rough ocean would get rough, it'd wash over and wash on over to the sound. When the sound tide would come, it'd wash on over that way. I mean, you know.
Well, did it hurt your house?
Well, it'd wash under the houses. It wasn't, you know, not like in a hurricane. See, it'd come just a rough seas, it'd wash over and was not in a storm.
Okay.
And you always have what they call spring tides. In the spring, you'd always sound tides would come up. But it wouldn't be no hard winds with them, you know, just...
I know you've seen a lot of storms here.
I've seen a lot of snowstorms when I was a young kid. I mean, you know...
A lot of snowstorms.
I mean, there used to be a lot of cattle and horses, cows, you know, and
Right.
used to even be sheep. And they'd stream down the road when it'd be snowing hard and go get on these old store porches. There was 2 stores down, well, you know where Miss Campbell lives?
Yes.
Well, just right in that section, there was an old store. And a little bit this way, another one. And they'd get on them porches to get out in that snow, you know, stuff. And the horses would run us through the neighborhood, you know. And then these mosquito gloves. I've seen mosquito gloves here, and it'd look like smoke coming out in the smokestack, you know. You could see it over this marsh. And these horses, these wild horses, part of them nobody didn't own. A lot of them, all people owned them. But they would stream in the neighborhood here, and they were here with the Methodist church. They had one of these hand pumps. And people, they had some barrels, or people would pump that water in them barrels. And them horses would go there and drink, you know.
Uh-huh. When did they corral up the animals?
Well, they had that no-stock law. That was in the, I imagine that was probably in the late 40s, I imagine. You know, what they call a no-stock law. You had to get rid of all. They wasn't allowed for any to run like that.
Everywhere on Hatteras
the whole
Island?
Yeah.
And why did they put that into effect?
Well, I don't know. They probably, some people complaining probably. You know, I've seen they used to get these, have this, they called it distemper. Horses and cows would get a disease, you know, and they would die. I've seen a lot of them down, couldn't even walk.
How about, I remember reading somewhere about dipping vat.
Oh, I have. They had a dipping vat was right, well, it's this side of the where the food line is. But they had regular dip days. They had inspectors here that stayed down. There was, in fact, there was 2 of them. One, a big boss, they called him, you know, a younger guy, but they would come down and inspect, and they would have pinned these. They had a dipping vat, and they had a large pound. They pinned those cattle in it at one day, like. Then they'd pin the horses in, you know, later. But they'd run them through that dipping vat. They had another in-panel place where they called it the drip pen. They'd go down and slide in that dipping vat. They'd push them through it, and they'd swim it through that vat. It smelled just like a Lysol. It smelled just like that. They'd mix it. It was in 5-gallon cans. They'd have so much water, you know. And it was concrete, you know. And then they had an incline where they could walk up because have steps, you know, like you could, you know. And they'd go up and get in that drip pen, and that's where they'd drip, and the dip, you know, the liquid stuff would run. It was slanted so that it would run back in the dipping vat after they, you know, come out of the pen. And then they'd let them out of that into a larger pound on in and keep them.
And that was to take care of ticks?
Ticks. That was a tick. And after they would go through that, there'd be a man standing right down to the end of the dipping vat where they'd come out of the water with a paintbrush, you know. It sounds comical, but it's the truth. A can of green paint. He'd take that dip, and he'd take on the rump like of each creature that would come out, dab them with a dab of green paint. Then they had a range rider. He lived here in Avon. In fact, he was my mother's cousin. He would ride all over the whole island. He'd go mostly to Oregon Inlet back this way. And if they find anything that didn't have a dab of green paint on it, They'd have to haul it in and they'd take it and, impound it
Oh.
and sell it or,
Okay. Well, that must have looked kind of strange with the animals running around with the green spots on them.
Yes, they'd have that. But that was the only way you could tell if they hadn't been dipped. See,
Mm.
they saw one with that green paint on it, they know he'd already been dipped. But they'd do it about seemed to me like it was about every 2 or 3 weeks. But they'd pin them wild horses, and everybody, there was, half a dozen men in the neighborhood had horses, saddles, they'd round them up, just like, cowboys round them up, and pin them in these big pounds. After they get you, they'd go nowhere to go when you'd get back up, they'd head right towards the pounds, and go in there.
Well, when you were a kid, did you eat a lot of hog and?
That's the only way you had it. There wasn't any store. There was a lot of stores here, but there wasn't any refrigeration. Didn't have any electricity. Nobody didn't even have generators then.
Uh-huh. So did you have
they would
ice boxes or?
They had ice boxes, yeah. They had they'd kill a creature. They'd dress it out and sell it for the pound. I remember there used to be a man come down here he was transferred down here in the Coast Guard from New Jersey, and I know him well. He'd buy a steer or something from somebody. He'd go out and kill it and dress it and take it under the oak tree down there after you go by the cemetery on the right, it was Loney's house. But anyway, that's where he'd have a table set down, he'd sell it. 15 cents a pound for the hindquarter, like, the regular steak. And for the stew stuff, it'd be 10 cents a pound. Have a pair of scales hanging on a tree right there, right under a big oak tree, Lay it right there and kill them.
So, how did you keep food from spoiling?
Well, you didn't have too much food. I mean, it was during the Depression when I grew up. Nobody hardly had any food.
Mm-hmm.
What I was raised on was beans, and vegetables, and crabs and fish. I mean, you'd get a mess of stuff like that once a month, maybe like that. Nobody didn't go. I remember, well, even after they got refrigeration, we used to go. I'd go all the way from here to Norfolk to the giant open air market and buy stuff about once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Carry out a big box, with me with ice and
Right.
And bring
For
in a milk or
supplies.
two or something like that. Chicken, beef. And then I drove a truck from here to Norfolk for 23 and a half years.
What kind of truck?
It was Gerald Williams and Charles. And
Yes.
their dad, he had a business. He was a wholesaler and a jobber. When he got out in the Coast Guard up there in New York, he came down here and he started that trucking business. And I worked with him for 8 or 10 years, and then I started driving a truck by myself. I was on one truck, and he had another driver on the other. And I was serving from Buxton to Hatteras, and he was serving this way on up the road after me.
Well, what did you haul? What did you?
We hauled everything, general cargo. You could see the refrigerators after they put that electricity down here.
Do you remember what year that was?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I remember the night they turned the electricity on. They had a marriage to the Methodist Church. My second cousin got married there. You don't know her probably.
What is her?
Her name was Fanny. She was a Scarborough. Fanny Scarborough. She married Edgar
No.
Hipper. And up before you were
Yeah.
down, you're like, but you know Hazel and Vernon?
Yes.
Well, it was her sister.
Okay.
She got
The
married
Millers. Okay.
The Millers, yeah. She was
So
she married Edgar Miller.
that was the
He
day
was born and raised here, but he'd moved off to New York, and then he worked around. He retired in New York and moved down to Norfolk and married her where they worked up there.
Okay.
But that was the night
So-
that they turned the electricity on.
Well,
They
that
got
must
married.
have been something.
Yeah.
Certainly changed things, didn't it?
I worked with that. Before I went on that truck, I worked with that WPA. Our salary was $10.56 every 2 weeks, 40 hours.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
I'd
goodness.
come home, I'd go get a $10 worth of groceries in a box. You could get a big box of groceries, $10 then. They always said you could take a wheelbarrow full of, you could take $10 and go to the store and get a wheelbarrow full of groceries. Now you've got to have a wheelbarrow full of money to get a box of groceries. So that's the way.
That's the way it is. My goodness.
But that's the way. What we got, $10. And I had when we had our first baby here, Dixie. Hattie, where's Dixie's picture right here? Where's Dixie's picture? Dixie. Yeah.
Dixie Wallace is right there.
Yeah. She's anyway. When we had her, I was getting that $10.56. No, and you could get it every 2 weeks. They'd bring it down in an airplane.
Oh my goodness.
It was WPA. He'd bring the
Uh-huh.
checks down in this airplane, and he'd light right out back to this Irving and Mary's house out here on this flat place on the beach.
Uh-huh.
There wasn't any growth out there, then just flat ball diamond like.
Up there.
Yeah.
Up there.
So let's see if I have this straight. You worked for the WPA,
Yeah.
and then did you go right into working for Mr. Williams?
Yes, I went to working with him. His nephew went in the Coast Guard. That's when the Coast War started in 1942.
Mm-hmm.
His nephew went in the Coast Guard, and I took his place.
Okay.
And then I worked with him a year and a half, and I quit, and I went to Norfolk, and I worked at the welding shipyard for 3 or 4 months, and I saw a boiler explode on one of the boats I was working on. The people come on with the skin hanging on them burnt,
Oh.
and I quit.
Uh-huh. I don't blame you. I bet
So-
you that was a terrible
So I
sight.
come back home, and at that time, he had another one of his nephews was working with him that had gone with him when I quit the first time. So he got me to go back with him then. That boy went on a tugboat in Norfolk. Clayton
Oh.
Brothers, he's here now.
Yeah.
He had it. He was doing it.
Okay.
When he went on the tugboat, that's before he went in the Coast Guard. But then I went back on that job, and I stayed another 19, 20 years. And,
Oh, and get back to what you hauled, what you carried.
well,
Would the
We-
truck be empty leaving here and going to Norfolk?
I would leave here. I would go out on the road on a Monday and take orders to these stores and Coast Guard stations on a Tuesday, on a Monday. Tuesday morning, I would go to Norfolk and put in orders, go around buying, sometimes paper what you'd got the week before. And on a Wednesday, on a Thursday morning before we would come home, we'd bring a lot of frozen foods. We'd buy we hauled a lot of beef, perishables. To gather up a lot of it from different places and carry it to Swift and Company. That's where we'd get all of our meats and put it in their freezer. We're way below zero, and leave it overnight until we pick it up the next morning. But that was, and we sold alcohol, a whole truckload of beef. I hauled the Navy milk when the Sea Beast was down there, naval base down there.
Uh-huh.
I hauled their milk from Norfolk when they was down there in that same truck, had a refrigerated truck like that.
And when did you stop doing that work?
I stopped doing that in 19 and on the ferries. I stayed on the ferries 10 and a half years. I retired on that.
The ferries
First I got out of the Coast Guard.
down
Like I
in
said, I was in the Coast Guard 3 different times.
three different
Three
times.
different times.
How come three
Well,
different?
the first time I went in what they call the Economy Act, they discharged about 100 Coast Guards. At one time, it was in the Depression. Honorable discharge. And if you was on a temporary enlistment, if you was, say, like if you was a chief, you could stay in, be broke down to a first class. If you was a first class, you could take a second class and stay in. If you was a second class, you could take what they call a surfman and stay in. So I was a surfman, and I didn't have nowhere to go but out. But anyway, I got an honorable discharge. That was I got discharged on the 31st of May, 1933.
Okay.
And I was out 3 months, and they called me back.
Oh.
So then I went back and stayed, pulled another hitch.
Uh-huh.
And then I got out after that hitch was over to come home, and I stayed. I was in 35. And in 38, I went back in again.
Oh.
And I went up in New York, Fisher's Island, off the Connecticut shores.
Where was it?
It was off the Connecticut shores, an
Okay.
island called Fisher's Island. It's 15 miles southeast of Montauk Point, New York.
Okay, I know where Montauk
Yeah.
is.
And I stayed there 6 months, and I got on a medical discharge. I was on guard duty up there after that 38 hurricane. They had a bad hurricane up there in September the 21st, 1938. And it washed our boathouse and everything away. And I went on guard duty over in Stonington, Connecticut. They had a federal carload of money. It was derailed, and they had everything was going, had Boston Post Road blocked off, no traffic at all on it. And one of the big Coast Guard buoy tenders, of course the Coast Guard didn't have the buoy tender business at that time.
Oh, they
didn't? Branch of its own.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But one of the tenders had washed up and was right across the highway.
My goodness. So, when you stopped the job, driving the truck.
That's when I went on the ferry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was 10 years.
I was on there 10 and a half years ferry. Yeah.
And was that the ferry down in Hatteras?
Hatteras, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that would be about 1979?
I got out of there in 75, I believe.
Okay.
I mean, I went in there about 65.
Okay.
I stayed 10 and a half years. I went on there on the 4th of July in 1965, I believe it was. I got see, I don't really know this when I was in there. I got Because that's the only thing I've done since I got on the ferry. I mean, I worked when they moved the lighthouse. I worked there for, I think, about 6 months. I think I went there. And,
How did you happen to get involved with that?
well, Richie, you know Richie Meekins?
Yes.
Well, he's my cousin. And he called me when they asked me if I wanted the job, and I told him yes. So he told me, says, when can you come? Go to work? I said, right now.
So
I went right down there, and they hired me.
What did you do down there?
Well, I started I was cleaning the brick, and they was taking them out from under the tenant houses.
Uh-huh.
What I had a hammer and a chisel, and I would knock that mortar off and then brick what you could get off me. Then after that, I had 2 large vats, and with acid, they'd get this acid, it's carbolic acid. It would be 4 gallons in a case. And you pour a gallon or 2 of that in under a tank, and had the tongs, dipped in bricks there and had rubber gloves. And dip it down, put them bricks, so many of them down, let them soak in there for a few minutes. Then you take them out and you could scrape that mortar off just like cream,
Oh my goodness, isn't that
then
something?
you dip them in another vat and rinse them off like that. And they used them brick over again to the, when they blocked the houses up again.
Okay.
And then after I got them cleaned up in that job, I went on security. So I stayed there overnight, guarding after they started moving things.
My goodness. And now you work at Food Line.
Yeah.
How long have you worked there?
I went there, it will be 3 years in November. I mean, it was 2 year last November, in other words, so I don't know how long I'll stay there. I had a foot operation about 2 months ago, and it's still stays swell, so it don't bother me to work. When it's working, it's when I sit around it bothers me. It can hurt, and I can get up and walk around it easy.
Uh-huh. But when you're sitting
a little
real...
piece of bone out of it. They said it right across this way. I mean, my foot's all swollen up now. I just got my shoe on, lace loose,
Uh-huh.
But it don't bother me working, and I'm a kind of nervous type. I like to be doing something. I ain't used to, I said I was afraid to quit, afraid I wouldn't get started again.
Well, that's a good outlook. I know you've done some fishing.
Yeah, I eat commercial fish.
Now, when...
With 3 different people, because my uncle that I did the work with on the hill up there, he had a long niggle. I fished with him some. Then I fished with my other uncle, Watson. That's Rebecca over here, her daddy.
Okay.
So he was my uncle, because I fished with him. But I fished here for a season, like after I got out in the Coast Guard. And I didn't, before I went on that truck with and I fished, and I didn't make enough to even pay for my lunch that I carried in the fish out of it.
Oh, dear.
Right. Go out and some days not catch nothing.
Uh-huh.
Period,
Always long hauling?
Yeah, long hauling. And we've had some good catches. I never, well, it's kind of comical. One time I fished with a man and his son, and they was crossed up with one another. You don't remember older people. And, well, there's, you know, Virginia Scrubbage, her daddy,
Yes.
and her granddaddy. And they clears one another like that. And they got in an argument on one day. They said they wasn't going to, the son said he wasn't coming no more. We didn't have him. They got over some minor thing. And he said, take his boat. So they just said, after we take this net in, I'm taking my boat and I'm going home. I ain't coming this sound anymore. So when we got the Union Hall, we hadn't been kidding around home. We got a load of shad out there, what they call the new channel. We had a load of shad. Never saw you that time for that time for. And when we was coming in, like he said, boys, we want to get an early start in the morning. He already said he wasn't going to go to sound anymore, you know.
What other types of fish did you catch besides the shad?
Well, there wasn't, you know, only catch shad a certain time of the year. You didn't ever hardly catch any that. It was unusual to catch a lot of shad like that, I mean, in a long there.
Uh-huh.
But we catch trout and spot and croaker. Was about the three main fish that you would catch.
And was there a fish house over at the harbor like there is now?
Well, they used to have a fish house up to the Mill Creek. Before he moved
Mill
down to
Creek?
the harbor. Yeah, well, I was up, well, you know, to the very north end of the road. You know where you go up there and turn around?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see that old dirt road that goes, is there a dirt road right to the head of it that goes down toward that creek, you know?
Okay.
That was where the fish house was there.
Okay.
And he moved it here after they built this harbor. There wasn't any harbor here at that time, so just straight shoreline.
And who owned the fish house? Do you remember his name?
George Gray's dad, he started it, you know.
Oh.
He had the fish house up there, just moved it back. He always bought fish here from way back when I was a young kid.
Okay.
He had a fish house out in the Sound. You'd have to take a ship and paddle out to it, you know.
Oh, you couldn't dock?
You couldn't, there wasn't no dock,
Okay.
no dock. So people have their boats, they just anchor them offshore, you know, had anchor and just anchor them up and then wade out to them and get in them and go.
And how did he get rid of the fish? Where?
Well, he had
Did
a
he
larger
leave-
boat. He had a larger boat with a house on it, you know, not just a, you know. And he would ice the fish. He'd go, he'd carry those fish, he'd ice them and carry them up to Rodanthe and meet another boat that would come from Rodanthe from Elizabeth City.
Oh.
If they would bring a load of ice, you know, cake ice, large 400-pound blocks of ice, they would bring it down and he would bring it down there. He had an ice room and had sawdust in there, you know, to keep it. And he would shave that ice up, put it in, he'd build in boxes, fish boxes. I've made many of them on with hammer and nails. They broke down like, you know, an end and in the,
Uh-huh.
and they come in the late 20s, they come a glut of speckles right here. There was even, people will tell you this is the truth. There was even one man lived down here south end of the village. He was knocking them in the head with a hammer, like the Sound was full of speckled trout.
Oh, my goodness.
They was getting 15 cents a pound for those, unheard of in at that time, you know.
Oh, my goodness.
Now you get $1, I mean.
Uh-huh. That's something.
That same, in a freeze like that. I remember one time we had the Sound froze over, and I had an uncle. He went down the shore and he got a whole one of these 12-quart, what they call water duckies, you know, galvanized ducky with a hand,
Right.
full of soft crabs, right along the shore. That was unheard of at that time, and it's still unheard of now. I mean, you know, nobody does it now.
Well, when you were a kid growing up here, did you go to Buxton very often? And how would you get to Buxton?
Well, if you'd go down, I rode horse to Buxton. You'd ride horses. You
Oh, you would ride a horse?
Yes, I had horses. My father had a horse. My grandfather had one. Everybody had horses. And they'd go down there to a school committee. They'd have entertainments, they call them. Entertainment, you know, they'd make up plays and have plays in school. And they'd go down there and there was one man there that let them put their horses in there in his pound, you know, until they get ready to come home. Somebody met there one time and opened the gate, let all the horses out there and walk home.
Do you remember the very first time you ever left the island?
The only first time I ever left the island was when I broke my leg and they took me to Elizabeth City.
That was the very first time. Okay. And get from here to Elizabeth City on boat, you have an estimate of how long that would take?
Well, you would, they used to have freight boats here in Avon. It would bring the freight here from Elizabeth City. There was two of them. They brought all the supplies that these stores had, you know. groceries.
And were they owned by
They was owned
businesses
by-
in
no,
Elizabeth City?
No, they was owned by the people, yeah.
Oh, they
my
were?
wife's uncle, he owned one of the boats. He'd go up on the Julia Bell. They'd haul lumber, they'd haul groceries, they'd haul coal. They even brought automobiles, Ford, Model T Fords from Elizabeth
Oh,
City
my
on their
goodness.
boats, and they'd land them on a flat, a flat to the boards down, run them ashore, run them in a flat to bring ashore. Yes, all that stuff. All the lumber that was brought was brought from the boats too. Wasn't no trucking then, because there wasn't no way to get across the inlet.
Do you remember?
The ferry the first ferry only bring 2 cars,
Oh, it did. I
With a
didn't
little
know.
old Model T Ford motor in it. That was all
I
Toby
didn't know
Tillett.
that. Toby Tillett?
He's the one that he had it up until the state took it over. I mean, to the old LST boats in there.
Hey, what would you say was the worst storm you ever experienced here?
Well, I've not been here in no right real. In the '44 hurricane, they washed this house here. They were only, of course, there's only the 2 rooms out where the highway is now.
Okay. And the 2 rooms, what year did you build that?
Well, I built the rest of it right here. I've been quilting on it all my life, But that was all we started. My grandfather bought that for me. And it was originally, that one room there was originally a kitchen. You know Lola Meekins?
Yes.
You know where she lives?
Uh-huh.
Well, that was a kitchen. It set off in their house. They had a walkway go up to that kitchen. That was their kitchen.
Oh, my goodness.
They give it to an old lady. She was an old widow woman. I think she came down from Collington. And they moved it out, back of Lola's out on the beach out. They had a big pound out there. And then they had her a bedroom built on it. That's the bedroom over there, my wife's bedroom right now.
Okay.
So that's what we bought. That was my wife's, well, it's my mother's cousin. They bought it for their daughter, and they moved it down where Tanya's trailer was.
Okay.
That's where and when my grandfather bought it for me, we moved it back up here. I pulled it here, we moved it on bedways and rollers, And I pulled it with a WPA truck, a dump truck. I was driving a dump truck, hauling sand and stuff for the WPA when I was on that.
Okay.
And that's how we did it. And it washed it off of the foundation. It washed it out where the highway is now. And the day before the storm, my wife it was 1 month before Wallace was born. Just 1 month. She was 8 months pregnant.
Oh, geez.
And she'd preserved some pigs. And she had one of these kitchen cabinets with a porcelain top, and where you keep your flour and stuff. And she had them pigs sitting on the top of that, 8 or 10 quarts of pigs. And every one of them pigs went in the floor, and not a jar of them broke where they fell in the water, see the water. And I had excuse me, we had one of these old paper wardrobes.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thing, stiff cardboard paper, you ordered the catalog and put it together.
Right.
We had our clothes in it, and our little girl, Jessica, she had one of these little coloring things, a little tin thing with different colored stuff, and you take a brush and wet it and draw it. Had one of them was in the bottom of it, because that water got in there. You ought to see I had a suit of clothes in there that looked like a rainbow.
Well, when your house washed out towards where the highway is, how did you get it back here?
Well, the Red Cross moved in during all the houses here. There's 25 homes here off the foundation.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. Clayton Brothers' home washed on the wash of the beach on the high water mark.
Oh, my goodness.
And Clemmy Gray's house, where Carl Gray lives now in George, it washed out where Carrie Gray's is,
Uh-huh.
And the Pentecostal parsonage, you don't remember this, but you know where Tanya lives now?
Yes.
Where Gib Gray had a store there, a large store, a good-sized store that time, and it washed out to the dike. There was a dike then. It outwashed to that dike, and the parsonage washed out and washed against it, out against that dike.
Oh, my goodness.
It was all washed everywhere, all the houses around here. It washed, my wife's father had a store. It washed that from where that turn, I don't know if you're familiar or not, where where Ignatius Scarborough used to live. And they
Mhm.
built a new big,
I
right
remember
that
his
turn,
old
that
house.
store was there. He watched us out there. We're right close to where Orville Scarborough is on that back road, you know.
My
was,
goodness, everything was topsy-turvy.
Richard Gray had a store and a pool room there. And I went in there and stood in it. I went, why I say I wasn't in here in a bad storm. I was in Norfolk. And my wife, she went up to her brother's up. Yeah. So I went in there, that store with it on the ground. And I measured the tide mark where the mud, you know, where the height was right to my shoulder blade.
Oh my
How deep
goodness.
it was.
I
And I didn't, I couldn't find out where my house was until we got home. We'd started to come home with a truck. We had
Well, did you know how bad the damage was down here?
didn't know until we got here. We knowed it was bad because we'd started to come down that morning from Norfolk. And we got down to Point Harbor. And the bridge was out. A tug or a barge or something had hit the bridge and knocked that out, and we couldn't get across that. So we couldn't have got down to Oregon Inlet. It was closed out anyway, wasn't you? No passing across that. So what we did, we took the truck and we went back to Norfolk and put everything back in cold storage. And went out to Virginia Beach. And my uncle was working in Virginia Beach at the Fort Story to the Army base. And he brought us down. And we come down to Oregon Inlet and left his car. And they had one of these command cars, Coast Guard, brought us on down. And I didn't find where my house was until I got home. And somebody, Gracie it was, said, had a piece in a paper. I said, I told my wife, said, honey, you didn't tell me you was going to move while I was gone. But all the time, you wouldn't believe it. See that? There wasn't any growth on the beach. All those cedars and stuff you see now, ever the beach was just as clear as this floor. I mean, there wasn't none before the storm. There wasn't any growth here up before that hurricane. Of course, there wasn't any dikes or anything. But anyway, you could see large clumps of mud where it had come out in the sound around. And you could see dead hogs, and that's the most rabbits, dead rabbits.
Oh.
And stuff
All
around
the
the beach where you
wildlife,
come down.
sure. Well, that sounds like that was a bad one.
It was a bad storm, I'm telling you. And there was a long neck crew that was up off here, one little kitty cheek they call it. They'd been fishing in that new channel. And they was going out, that storm wind was taking them out, and they went by a telephone pole, and the guy happened to get a loop around that pole, that's all, so they didn't go in the ocean.
Oh my
That was
God.
a long neck crew. And it was, and one of the freight boats that I was telling you about where they bring the freight from Elizabeth City, it was what they call, one of them had two masts, had sails. They didn't even have no motors, them days. They had one of them busted up, and they found part of it way down to Hatteras, where it, you know,
Oh my goodness.
where it broke apart.
I get, there was no way of telling when a storm was coming
They
back
didn't
then.
have any warning of it. It's just like the one I was telling you about. I was in up in New York, Hatteras Island. That come one day about 2 o'clock. No warning or anything. And there was 501 people drowned in that one. And that was on the 21st of September. And if it had happened 2 weeks earlier, before all the summer people had left the beaches, you know. But I saw people, I was on guard duty up there for 3 weeks. I saw people looking for silverware and stuff in the sand on the beach where you wouldn't know they'd ever been a home, where they'd had
Oh
homes
my
there.
goodness.
And they had people, there's one lady right there on the island where we was, ashore where we was on guard duty. She was standing in the window, and a window came up and cut her and killed her standing right to a window. And they had a funeral home there in that village where I was in guard duty, to Stonington, Connecticut. And I was on guard duty patrolling around there. And they would come in the Portuguese level, you know. And they'd come out and say, come on in and have a drink. They was in there playing the piano and having a time, you know, drinking. You know, and all the people in there dead, too.
Oh boy. What a mess.
I wasn't used to something like that. I mean, you know, there in the area.
Well, when you were a kid, was there booze in Avon? Was there liquor?
Liquor during Prohibition, yeah, there was bootleg people would sell it. I know several people around there that was selling it, you know, 50, 75 cents a pint. Of course, that was a lot of money then, you know.
But if somebody wanted a nip, they could
They
get
would bring
one.
it here from Englehart, from over here in Mans Harbor. There's a place over there. They made it. Got a lot of
Okay.
whiskey stills over there, you know. And they'd bring it in here in 5-gallon jugs, you know. And there was a creek down here. Well, it's not too far down shore where they pull in there of a night and one of these shad boats, you know, with these 5-gallon jugs. You know, because I never saw nobody. My brother and another boy stole 5-gallon jugs and Curtis from one time.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they did. They say there's some of it now overboard where they got in a storm or something where they.
Oh.
When I was in the Coast Guard, I saw that stuff washing up on the beach. I found a case of liquor. Of course, I wasn't supposed to do it. No, something, it wasn't as big as that, but I mean, when I kicked it, it kind of rattled, and it was a 12 quarts of chicken cock rye whiskey in a bale with straw in it, in a burlap bag. It was in a burlap bag with straw in it, and then 12 quarts in a compartment, like in a compartment. Well, I didn't know what to do. I know I was supposed to turn it in, I mean, you know. So I take it up on my shoulder, and I take it up in the hills, a lot of grass like it is here, just on grass, you know. And I put it in that grass. And the next time I went down there, it wasn't, maybe not the next night, but maybe the next, on patrol like that. It was in the night, so I take it and I carried it back to the station. And our watch house set up on a hill right to the edge of the ocean, and we had where the station was, you'd get on a concrete walk and go from we was on the edge of the dune, and go down there and walk and get on to go to that watch house, and it was about that high from the ground, and there's a lot of grass growing around. And I hid it underneath that watch house. That's what it is.
That was a good place.
I know I didn't drink whiskey, but I give my father a couple of it. He was in the next station to me.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. And I traded some of it for gas. I had a car. And, you know, gas, I could go get 10 gallons of gas for $2, 20 cents a gallon. You know, but I only got $60 a month. And I was sending some money home to my parents. I wasn't married. And I traded for gas, you know, and I give it one boy from here was up there trying to get in the Coast Guard. At that time, and he couldn't get in. He was up there with his cousin. He was colorblind, so I give him a quart of it. That's the way I got rid of it. But I mean, I would have gotten in big trouble if they, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Found that. We used to go over to a place and get a shot. You get a shot of whiskey. I never was a whiskey drinker, but I done 2 or 3 shots like that. But the guy I'd go with, he'd go every day and get him. A lady would, I mean, a nice old lady she was. She had a rooming house, and she had a place all separate where you had booths, you know. She didn't serve any meals or anything. All she served was whiskey. You'd get a shot of that stuff. And I used to go with the same guy. We'd go to a place, he knew a guy didn't make homebrew. We'd get a bottle of homebrew like that.
Well, Hattie's from Avon, too.
She was born and raised. We're third cousins.
Okay.
My mother and her father were first cousins.
Okay. So you two have known each other forever.
For all of our life, we went to school here. We was in the same grade together. Of course, when I quit, she was still going. I mean.
And how old were you when you got married?
I was 23. Of course, according to my record, I'd be 25. I'm according to that. But she was 22. She was born the 14th of February, 1914. And I was born the 17th of June, 1913. But like I say, that label got in there in the way.
When you got married, did you get married in the church, or?
We got married. Her uncle, or I'd say he wasn't her real uncle, but she called him uncle. It was her mother's uncle, I think. Her mother was dead. Her mother died when she was only 2 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
But he was down. He was in the Methodist parsonage over where the parsonage is now. Only it was an old 2-story house, you know, an old tiny house. And he was down in the bed. He married us there.
Okay.
His wife. And you don't remember George Mickens. He used to live here. He worked at Matthew Furniture. He worked in the store my wife's father stole it. His witnesses. We got married on the 5th of September.
Did you take a honeymoon?
We didn't have anyone to honeymoon with. And there wasn't no way to get off hardly then that way. Nobody had. Nobody went on honeymoons right there in the days that I know. Now a lot of people go on these cruises, you know.
Yeah,
but
they
they
do.
didn't have honeymoons. They're
Uh-huh.
having them now.
Well, what did you do for fun? Like when you were first married, and what was
Well,
what was
they
entertainment?
used to have square dances up around these stores here. They go
Oh,
around.
they did?
Yeah, and they would have. They had movies, the Hatteras, you know, had a movie theater, Hatteras.
That was a good trip.
Yeah.
Get down there.
Yeah, go down there. Yeah. There used to be a preacher here. He was a Methodist preacher, and he stayed with my wife's parents a lot, and he'd there. And he had a car. He'd loan us his car, and we'd go down there to the movie or something like that. And then my grandfather had a car. I had access to that when I wanted it. But when his wife wasn't looking, he was married. It was his second wife. She didn't think too much of me, so. But
Do you remember what
key.
What kind of car it was?
Yeah, it was a 1934. I first tried to drive.
How did you learn to drive?
Well, from my grandfather, he had a 19 and 26 Ford, Model T Ford. And he'd go down to our house, and we lived, like I was telling you, where Cyril's trailer is. He'd visit us, carry us groceries and stuff, and he was just as good to my mother. There's only 3 of them children in there. But he had that Model T Ford. If I was in the house visiting with my mother, he'd let me go out there, and I'd go out there and start it up and go down to the end of the road and turn it around, that's all. I'd crank it up, you know, you had to crank it.
Uh-huh.
If you could see the broken arms that them old Fords kick back on people and break their arms, you know, it wasn't nothing. See somebody going around with their arm to sling. You didn't have to ask them how they done it.
Oh,
They
dear.
always, when they cranked them old Fords, they'd far back and go, you know, break their arms.
I'm sure they
There
would.
used to be a girl here in Frisco that did that. She was kind of a tomboy, like, you know.
Uh-huh.
And she cracked it. And they said she had her arm broke 3 times.
Good grief.
She's a Fulcher girl, Cynthia Fulcher.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
Did your wife work outside the home?
No, well, oh yeah. She used to work down here cleaning cottages.
She did.
Yeah, 60
Uh-huh.
cents an hour, I think it was she got. And then she worked, well, maybe, I don't know if she worked a week or not, that laundromat. They got her folding the sheets and stuff in that hot place. She come home one day nearly dead. She said she wasn't tackling that no more.
I think that would be a hard job in
I
the
know it was, yeah.
summertime.
But we had an aunt, her brother, her sister-in-law, she stayed there for, I don't know, a year, I guess, or so.
Have you ever seen any shipwrecks?
Well, only I was the last one that I saw, this old Kohler. I saw a large boat come ashore up here. I don't know how many years ago it been. She come, she was up dry. You could walk up to it with your shoes on, but they come there at high water and pull that thing off. But the old Kohler, you know, the one that they burned up, you've heard of the old Kohler.
Yeah, I have.
I was home out of the Coast Guard. That was between my husband, before they called me back in the Coast Guard, between the kids. I went up right after that storm, and they just built that highway in Nag's Head, asphalt road. And that bus, it was going out from Madio to Norfolk. I was on that bus. And that storm tore that highway up, and that bus had to go all out around that road, you know, that sand to get up back on the road again. And that's the most seabirds you saw there, around where they turned that highway over.
Oh my goodness.
And that the other they come on. Another boat come ashore one time loaded with tires. They said she was in Cuba or somewhere. That was during the World War II. She was loaded with tires and tubes. It was truck tires, large tires, you know. And the stems on them tubes was that long. And you'd see these cars going around here, people with them stems sticking out of their tires where they got them tubes, you know.
Uh-huh.
But them guys, I went up there, they had 5 of them stretched out in a little teeny boathouse where they all drowned it, 4 or 5 of them.
Oh my goodness.
And there's one of them they didn't find. They said he wandered over in the woods, and they told that they found one of them later, a few months or after that in the woods. They wandered over there and died.
Mm.
But that was, and I went up there my brother-in-law went up there one day, just missing up around the beach. And where the old wreck was, the part of the bottom, I was there, the tide was low out. And looking around, I picked up a is a corking set, a thing that you cork, you know, leaks in a boat with.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? It's
Right.
a thing you cork,
Right.
you know. And
Yeah, I
I
know.
give it to him. He had a boat, and I broke it. And it was laying in the bottom. It had been sanded up, and I just saw some dark edge, and I picked it up, and I
Wow.
thought it was. Everything else was washed. Just the bottom of it was there, was all was there.
Do you remember during World War II hearing activity out here?
I've seen the fire, you seen, you know, the lights out there, and they said it's shit, you know.
Uh-huh. Did you have to keep the houses dark?
They kept dark, house dark, then you had all the vehicles, they didn't let you all had to have your headlight painted. They'd paint half of the headlights, just like a car headlight. They'd paint the top part of it black, you know, so
Oh.
the light would just shine down, wouldn't shine out. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about what makes Avon different than the other villages around here? Is there anything
Well,
unique?
the thing is to come to Avon, you got to go to Avon. It's not like
Yeah.
if you go to Hatteras. If you go down there, you got to go to Hatteras. You got to go to Frisco. You got to go to Buxton and the other.
Right.
But to go to Avon, you got to turn and go in there. That's all.
That's true.
And there's some people when they built this highway, there was a certain class of people here. Instead of building it like they built it, you know, they wanted it to come in up to the mill, what they call the Mill Creek. That's up the Hatteras Colony up. You know where the north part of it is, right?
Right.
The north part of it is. They wanted it to come in the highway and come in around through the village, come out like this and go out further down like that.
Oh, my goodness.
But I'm glad they didn't. I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather it be like this
Yeah.
because you'd have wrecks, you'd have everything, you know.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, if they'd done that, it would have been west of me. I mean, I'm nearly as close to it now as it would have been there. But they wouldn't be, you know.
No, you would have
Nobody
had
else
all
would
that
have,
traffic back here. Well, this village really looks a lot different than it did when you were a kid.
Oh, I know, yeah, ain't no comparison.
Did you ever think it would grow up like this?
No, I never. I said if some of these old people would come back, they would.
They'd be surprised. Do you think life here is better now, or was it better when you were a kid?
Well, people has more, but I mean, people has more now, but you appreciate it more than when you had it, when you did have it.
Right.
But when you didn't have it,
Yeah.
some had it, some didn't. I mean, you know, the big livers around Avon at that time was Coast Guards. I mean, you know, there was all, but there was, let's see, there was Creed's Hill, Durant's is 2, Cape Hatteras is 3, Big Kennedy's 4, Little Kennedy's 5, Gulch Hole. So I can remember 9 Coast Guard stations, and they had, you know, they had an average of 8 to 12 men in a crew. Well, in World War II, they had a bunch of them, you know, recruits them.
Right.
But at that time, they was the big livers. They got the base pay in the Coast Guard at that time was $60 a month. That's what I got when I was in the Coast Guard. I got $1 extra at one time. $1 for sharpshooter with a rifle. I mean, you know.
Okay.
Expert would have got $2, but like that. So $60 then is more as much as $500 is now.
Mm-hmm.
I used to go to the store, and you could get 3 cans of evaporated milk. I mean the tall cans for 25 cents.
Oh, my goodness.
That's a little over 8 cents a can.
Uh-huh.
Right now, the cheapest you can get down there is 69 cents for 1 can. You think
Right.
what 3 cans would cost you now?
Yeah.
Nearly $3.
Yeah. No,
So,
money
I mean,
doesn't go as far as it did
You can't.
back then. Well, so the Coast Guard was pretty good. I mean,
well, that was
steady
all there
check.
was here. That was, you know, the fishermen wasn't hardly doing anything.
How about
My father got out in the Coast Guard when I was probably 12-year-old, 13 maybe. He come home and got him a stand of shadnets, they call it, you know. And he fished them 2 or 3 times, and he left them sitting in the sand and went back and went in the Coast Guard.
Oh, my goodness. How about, were there any boat builders here when you were
My
a kid?
my grandfather, he used to, and had his grandfather used to build, you know, work on boats and build them. And I had an uncle that did that. He was an old guy. He would repair boats and stuff, but there wasn't any what you really call. In my day, they could have been before, but boat builders. But there was a lot, some up there on Wanchis and in places like that. I got a boat out there, a nice boat. I've been thinking about selling it. It was John Baum, he's from Man's Harbor. Him and his brother, they built boats. He built that other nice looking boat way out there, bought it up in the yard.
Do you know when he built that?
No, I've had it about 3 years, and I don't. He didn't have it too long. I don't think.
So, boat builders that you knew of here in Avon would be building a boat for themselves, or maybe a
like,
friend.
Now there was a.
It wasn't
that's
a.
right. I forgot a minute. But there was a Willie Austin. You know, you've been here. He was.
Yeah,
here.
Rachel's.
Rachel's husband.
Yeah, I remember
he built
Rachel.
boats. He used to build boats and sold them. He'd sell them by the foot. You know. But they was not large boats, just smaller boats. You know, skiffs. What they call skiffs. Like. But I think there were 2 or 3 around the harbor now that he built.
Still here.
I think.
Did you remember, or did you ever hear anything about when they used to have the seaweed business here?
Oh, yes, I've been here with that. My wife's grandfather, he had seaweed business. And Charles's daddy, they had seaweed
Charles
business.
Williams?
Charles Williams, yeah.
And
the
what
one I
was,
worked for was the trucking business.
And what was Hattie's father's
Hattie
name?
was Sparrow Scarborough. That was, you know Ignatius?
Yes.
Well, it was his daddy. He was the last one of them children. There was 9 of them children. And he was the youngest, and he was the last one of them that died. But his daddy had seaweed business. They had a huge house, had a silver baler, and they had flats, what they call barges, old flats. Had a couple of flats. They'd go along the shore. They had pitchforks, They take that. I've seen them do it, and I've done it. So they take pitchforks and they'd take them green seaweed, throw it up on the shore, and it'd dry. And they'd spread it out, and then they'd take it and haul it out to their big houses and let it dry out. And after it was dry, they wouldn't do nothing with it while it was wet. It would have to be perfectly dry. They'd put it in them big silver balers, and they would stand over maybe this high there. And they'd be, they'd put that stuff, bail it over, and then they'd have wire stuff. They had a baler, had gears on it. You'd fill things and bail it, throw it out like that. And you see these bales of hay.
Right.
You seen them?
Sure.
Same thing as that.
Okay.
And they'd haul it off. They'd have boatloads of it off. They used it for upholstery furniture upholstery,
For stuffing?
Yeah, stuffing stuff. Mattresses.
Okay.
I know people used to use it in mattresses. They used to make mattresses, yeah.
Did you ever sleep on it?
I've slept on them seaweed, pile them up on an old boat in a house down there. One time we used to go up there the night, spend the night up there on one of them old houseboats, laying them seaweed on it, afraid of snakes. When I was younger, Yeah, they had my wife, during the WPA, they had a sewing outfit down here. There's some ladies here in Avon. You remember Martha, man? Martha Williams? Or Gray, she was.
Gray, yeah.
She was a regional on me, but her stepmother and different ones would make, the WPA would give them material, and they'd make shirts and stuff for people. Some of them somebody had a shirt on one time on that WPA. He come out, he got one of them shirts somebody had made it. Had the pocket under the arm. They didn't know how to sew, They,
oh dear.
Yes, it's something.
Well, they would
comical,
sew the shirts, and then would they ship the shirts off
no,
somewhere?
they just give them to people around.
Okay. But the women would get paid for sewing.
They would get paid a little bit. So they had that old stoner Charles Williams, the man that I worked for trucking. He had a warehouse down there. And the lady was from Rhode Island that was in charge of it. Her name was Ray. She was originally a Meekins, but she'd been married and separated. But she was in charge of it. She had 8 or 10 people. My wife worked down there with them for a week or so.
Oh, she did?
And they had give sewing lessons. Teaching to sew and stuff like that. In that same building where he had that warehouse down there. They used to bring food down here. This WPA, they bring tubs of butter, you know.
Uh-huh.
Bring a lot of beans and potatoes in barrels. They bring potatoes in barrels. I had an uncle that lived in the house next year. It's not here now. It's the same house. It's on the corner up there. It belongs to Nellie Price.
Okay.
That's the one that used to be next to here. That was my uncle. They sold it. He moved when that 44 hurricane washed it off the foundation. He sold it to Nellie and her husband. They moved it up there. But he took care of some of that stuff, and they had canned hamburgers, beans, meal, flour, and stuff like that. They distribute out, yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, times were tough.
Yeah, pretty bad.
I guess it was hard on just about everybody here.
Yeah. There wasn't, well, like I say, the only people that was making out them days, that you can call making out, was the Coast Guard people. They had $60 with a long ways in that depression. That's when all the people used to be jumping out in the windows in New York.
Yeah.
But you want a drink?
I am fine.
Got plenty of Pepsi's in
no,
there.
thanks.
Yeah?
No,
Caffeine free.
No, I'm
You're
fine.
welcome to one.
I appreciate it, but I'm fine. I had a big glass of iced tea with my lunch. Do you remember when you got television here? Your first television?
Well, the first one I got, I bought from Ray O'Neill. You don't know him. You know Earl O'Neill.
Yes.
His brother, he committed suicide. I mean, you know, he put his went in the garage and turned his car on, you know.
Oh, dear.
He was having family trouble. Yeah, but I was at Norfolk. He was living in Norfolk. But he worked with Price Television outfit. And I bought that used television. It was a Bendix cable model. And I was just as proud of that thing. And one time it kind of, had an antenna, one time it got something wrong with it, and he was happened to be home then, and I asked him, I told him something. I said, what causes that? He said he'd look at it, he'd come here, and he slipped to turn that thing around, and there's a little thing, about that long, with a wire on. He took the thing, he said, that thing ain't no good on her. He twisted that thing, he throwed it out, and that thing come on just as pretty. So you just had to have your antenna turned right in the right direction. Just a little bit off.
Did you get many stations?
No, you couldn't get many stations. But you could turn it that way, and you felt like it's like that. But if you got it just a little bit off, it would. But you got to get it right exact. You got to keep turning until it got playing,
How about radio?
And you had to go out and turn it. You had to take a wrench. I didn't have to turn it a Stilson wrench, pipe wrench, and turn it. Well, radio. I had a radio. I think the first radio I had. There weren't many people around here had radios. Miss Willard Gray, George Gray's daddy, he had a big Atwater 10. It was a big, cabinet radio. It was a pretty cabinet, And Banny Williams, you don't remember him, he was a man who lived up the north end. He was kind of a comical character. But he got it somewhere, Banny Williams. He's been dead a long time. I mean, he was before you come here. He was, Christine.
Gray?
No, was it Banny Williams? He was, Mildred Beeman.
Yes.
He was her uncle. Her mother was his brother.
Okay.
But anyway, he got that television. And he told me one time, we were working on that WPA together. He says, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, my house needs painted. Yeah, little two-room house. His wife had it. He got married. The lady had the house. She was a widow woman. Another widow. She'd never been married. But he married her, and he'd been married and separated. But anyway, he said, on my house, he said, if you give me a couple gallons of paint, I'll trade you for that radio.
Oh.
So I said, all right. So I got him a couple gallons of cheap paint. It's supposed to be blue or purple, like. So I got the radio, and he said, he painted his house. He said, man says you got me in the mills. He said, that stuff says it's great color.
Great.
Yeah,
oh,
great.
Boy.
So after that, that television, you had to have 3 batteries, you had to have 3 A batteries. about this square, you know, and a D battery to hook up to them, you know, with no electricity.
Oh,
yet.
geez.
So I got the battery. So after a while, you could have her on, and she'd be playing. You could walk across the floor, and she'd change stations. I mean, you know.
Oh, my goodness.
So I told him, but he said, well, I'm glad of it. That's what you get for giving me that great pain.
A good trade, I guess
Yeah.
you thought. Do you remember where the stations came from?
Well, there was Pittsburgh was a popular station. Then I think it was KDKA or something like that. They used to have these. That's the guys on the WPA they look at these programs. They had plays on there. They continue from one night to the next. I Love a Mystery. I remember I had an uncle and him and another guy was always comparing what they saw the night before, on it. Ellis Gray, you know Libby Gaskins
Yes.
and them, it's her daddy. They were cousins. But there was I remember that one program that they would always discuss and run themselves in and Bill Miller talking about. But I Love a Mystery was the name of the program. I'd always listen and I'd talk about. I never got interested in that sort of stuff. I was more interested in ball games. I mean, if you get a ball game, they start broadcasting
Baseball.
Baseball, yeah.
Did you have a favorite team?
Yeah, I was a New York Giants.
Oh, really?
fan, and my brother, he was a Yankee fan.
Oh, well,
Ronald, yeah. He was a great Lou Gehrig fan.
That's good rivalry. How about newspapers? Did you get newspaper? How did you get news here? Like when you were a kid, how did you know what was going on?
The only thing, most of the newspaper then, I used to sell them. Anybody could use it. You could sell the Grit. You heard of it?
No.
The Grit. That was I forgot even where it's printed, but it was a weekly paper, And it was I remember one time I sold it, and I got an air rifle. You could get prizes.
Oh, okay.
And I used to sell seed. Oh my God, man! I'd sell garden seed. They say you could get different prizes for it. Or you could keep a certain percentage of the whatever. And send them the rest. They'd send you a big packet of different kinds of seeds. I've even sold scythe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, cloverine scythe. They'd send you'd sell that. Magazines. I used to sell McCall magazines.
Well, did you go house to house?
House to house, go out and meet anybody, sell it, yeah. I was 11-year-old, you thought you was a big deal.
Sure.
Regular sales.
I'm surprised to hear you mention divorce a couple of times.
Yeah. My
father
was separated, but they didn't divorce. They'd been separated years before they were divorced. He married again.
I guess I thought people...
In other words, he had a child up in New Jersey. It wasn't married, and that was in his parents, my grandparents, they adopted him. And after that, his mother, she was up in New Jersey. She got killed in a car wreck on her way to Florida. She was working with a wealthy family, and she had in some insurance, and I think he got, $12,000, $15,000. And he was about 18 years old then. Because after he got it, he went in the army, and he bought him a cement mixer and things, started making these concrete blocks and selling them but he never did that married. I think he just...
So, but divorce wasn't uncommon. I mean, it happened.
And divorce was kind of looked down on in them days, way back, you went nobody hardly ever divorced. Now, if you ain't been divorced at least once, you ain't nothing.
Well, that's the way it seems now, that's for sure. Well, I guess you've always liked living here.
I like pretty good, but now I've told my wife, she's trying to get Jessica, she wants Jessica to move back home, but Jessica says she ain't never going to move, she don't like it here.
She doesn't?
Stay in Raleigh, she's got a job, she works for the UPS company there in the office.
Well, she probably has...
She's on the computer, and stuff. But my wife did cry when she comes home, wants her to stay. She went back this morning. She come home yesterday, because on Monday she's off, I think Wednesday. And a lot of people around Avon that's been divorced, married 2 or 3 times. Earl O'Neill, he's been married 3 times that I know of.
Guess it happens everywhere.
Yes, it is. Of course, it's not that you hate for the people that are living together now are not even married. They don't bother about divorce. They don't have to worry about it.
I guess that's one way.
I see in the paper it advertises where you can get a divorced kid, you know.
I've seen that too. Yeah. It's a different
I
world.
wonder how they allow that. But I mean, way back then I was growing up, I saw something like that. Like somebody had been.
What do you think has made the biggest change on Hatteras Island as far as life here and what's life like? You think it's the road, the Oregon Inlet
The
Bridge?
fishing, the fishing has made the big, sport fishing. That's,
Sport.
that's the biggest money thing, I think, And another thing, I've thought about, a lot of people now, I don't get interested in politics or churches or nothing like that. I'm neutral and all that. But a lot of people were opposed to moving that lighthouse, but you hardly ever seldom see much about the lighthouse before they moved it. But since they moved it, it's made us all, everything they got in that food line, you only got a picture of a lighthouse.
You're right. You're right.
I never saw that. I mean,
Do you think tourism has been good for the island?
Well, I mean, it's good for the people that are involved in the tourist business. I mean, and I don't see that it's hurt. Just give a lot of people jobs if it wasn't for the tourists. You take a lot of these women around right over there in Avon, just cleaning these cottages. God, they're making more than I make food like cleaning cottages. And if it wasn't for the tourists, they wouldn't be making it, would they?
I guess it has a downside too, though.
Oh yes, there are people that don't think that. I hear people say, "Well, man, I was long for the old times, good old days," But somebody told me that I said, "Oh, to me, this is the good old days." Because I mean, if you went through what I did when I was growing up, you'd think it was the good old days too.
To be comfortable.
I've seen times when, if it wasn't for them for our grandfather, we wouldn't know where the next meal was coming from. But we know that they would want to come in anyway.
Right.
Well, it's not like then. You couldn't go out. I counted the other day, just laying in bed thinking, I counted about 52 houses in Avon that I have worked on and shingled, put roofs on. I was a roofer. I shingled out a lot of shingles.
Oh, my goodness.
I counted 52 that I had shingled, and I could name them and go right on the north end, right on, and 2 or 3 out of the villages I've shingled. And I've painted. There ain't many houses on there that I've not painted or built porches on. I've tiled, sealed it. I've put paneling like this. I've put a lot of this ceiling tile on. But the thing of it is, the ones that are doing it now are getting $12, $15 an hour for it. And I was doing it for 60 cents an hour, a lot of it. You know that old big house, the big bungalow house down, they call it Jensen Mickey's house. It's over back of my brother's house on the turn where you go to Harbor, like down on the turn. Is that, where Sandy Gray lives? Well, it's that next big house west of it, the big bungalow house. I tore 2 layers of asphalt shingles off of that. And I had to put some new rafters in it, and I put 40 sheets of plywood on it, and I put about 20 square shingles on it by myself, and I got less than $500 for it. And the day that I was supposed to start doing it, I did it for Rita Meekins, or Rita Gray over here. It was her and her sister, but I did it for her. The day that I was supposed to do it, her son was supposed to help me. I mean, And I took the job, but he was supposed to help me do it, But the day that I started, he started crabbing.
Oh, dear. So you were stuck alone.
And I had to start tying them off, and I thought, well, if I hadn't started it, I would have quit it, give up on it. But I hadn't started till I finished it. And I put a porch all around it. And they had been built there, and it didn't have a center block. It's a wide porch, nearly 8-foot porch. And it goes all the way around the house, except just as a little pantry. And it didn't have a block in the center row around it. I put blocks there, and it had thin flooring. I took that 5-foot or so treated stuff. So I mean that last your lifetime. I suppose.
You're a jack of all trades,
I
aren't
got
you?
everything that I mean.
Uh-huh.
I got
Do you
paint.
think you ever retire?
Well, I'm retired now. I got a good job down there. They let me do like I want to. I was supposed to work today, but I didn't work because we've had the bathroom tore up there. They had the shower went out,
Oh.
and they had Charles who been in here today and fix that. But I can go today. Doesn't they tell me? In other words, Wallace, he works a week in his off a week. I mean,
Uh-huh.
he goes to work every Tuesday morning, and he gets off the next Monday night for a week. So they let me work when he's off. I can work because they said not to leave her alone.
Well, that's good.
And when I'm
Yeah.
working, he's off. When he's working, I'm off.
Oh, that's good.
So, but he's off now, and I took the day off on account of helping him with that in there. I didn't
Uh-huh.
know. But I go to work tomorrow, and I enjoy working. I'm the type that I'm too nervous. I need to be doing something.
Uh-huh.
I like to work. I started working, I was about 14, 15 years old, and I ain't quit. So
Uh-huh.
I think that's what's kept me going.
Probably has
Yeah.
been. Well, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
You've got a good memory. You can remember all.
I remember a lot of stuff that happened 50, 60 years ago, but I couldn't tell you what I had for dinner yesterday.
Well, I couldn't tell you what I had for my dinner yesterday either.